Do you love me? Was the question that Jesus asked.
We were really excited that we were coming to a country that we had viewed as a Christian country, so we spoke very openly about our faith. We had to actually scale down a lot of what we were speaking about because it alienated people. In that area, we felt a lot more rejection than we did as immigrants.
Okay, this is the Jays dugout.
I work for a Major League Baseball team. When I'm in a foreign city and a Canadian national anthem comes up, and it hits more in the heart now than it does with Korean national anthem. That's when I feel it.
The thing I remember was how many white people were doing the jobs of what in South Africa black people would have done.
Do you love me? Do you love me? Was the question that Jesus asked. I'm not sure there's a more unsettling question than that question right there.
So I come from a family of 6 altogether, 4 children, mum and dad. And I come from, I would say, a privileged background in South Africa, comparatively speaking to the rest of the population. I grew up in a small town called Port Elizabeth and moved to Johannesburg when I was about 13. I grew up in the middle of the apartheid era, when it was at its peak through all the riots and the violence. My parents were pretty much from the liberal side of the political viewpoint. They felt very strongly that everybody should have equality, and they raised me in such a manner. But my extended family, so grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, definitely did not have the same viewpoint and would use very derogatory comments towards black people, speak about them in a negative way, very racist. In my formative years, I went to government school, which was completely all white, no colour whatsoever in terms of people, children. And I actually remember having an argument in grade 6 with a child who came from a very pro-apartheid background and arguing why we should vote to allow black people to have the right to vote. When our family moved to Johannesburg around 1986, my family sent me to a private school because they felt that it was really important that I got exposure to all different kinds of people. I remember having a black friend at school. Her father was a doctor. My father is an accountant. They lived in the townships, and she was chased by police. You know, here's me traveling on these comfortable white roads, you know, to my family home, and she would on the weekends be exposed to such severe violence in the townships because of the burnings and the beatings and just people trying to make change at that time because they really knew that they were at the brink of having a breakthrough on apartheid.
If you're going to love Jesus, your focus will be on people, on the needs and the nurturing of people.
I think from a personal perspective, I had always been involved in trying to make change. I think my parents were very active in trying to help others. My parents were part of the Rotary Club, and the Rotary clubs around the world sponsor a Rotary exchange program for students at grade 12 level. And there are hundreds of students who apply to the program. And when I was accepted at the end of my grade 12 year, the only country that would accept me was Canada. Austria and New Zealand didn't want any exchange students from South Africa because of apartheid. So I came to Canada in 1990 as a Rotary exchange student representing South Africa. I lived in a little town just 100 kilometers northwest of Edmonton with about 4,000 people called Barhead. And I was so nervous that the whole town was going to come and meet me at the airport, but fortunately they weren't all there. So my first thought as I got off the plane was, wow, it's freezing. And I remember there being a lot of snow and the wind just blew through your bones. The other thing I remember was how many white people were doing the jobs of what in South Africa black people would have done. So, you know, anything from the customs officials to the people who were taking the luggage to directing the plane. It was really a shock to see so many white faces, because I came from a country where it was 90% black, 10% white. I was like a little celebrity in this town because I was new and I had a different accent, and people wanted to get to know me and invited me places, and so that was my first exposure to Canada. But I would say it was also my first exposure to understanding the real impact of apartheid in the global economy, because I often felt like I was to blame for what had happened in South Africa. And here I was, 17 years old. I couldn't even vote at the time, and yet I felt like a lot of Canadians spent time picking on me because I was from South Africa. And I guess they were just interested, but, I was brought to tears many times. So I lived with 4 different families. I had a range of experiences in terms of family life and what they're called host families, so host brothers and sisters. They were all very welcoming, very kind, very loving. I think the things that stood out for me when I was living here was just how equal everything was amongst people. That was huge to me. So 1 year later, I returned to South Africa, and I was returning to go to university. I'd gained so much weight because of all the donuts and coffee that Canadians drink and eat. And that's the reason I don't drink coffee today, is because I had so much in that year that I stayed in Canada. So I went to university for 4 years and did my undergrad and postgrad. And then I worked for a consulting company. Meanwhile, my husband, Andre, who I didn't know at the time, he had been at Procter & Gamble. He'd been working there for, I think, a year. And he always tells the story of how he was looking for a wife. And he prayed and he said, God, next woman I meet has to be my wife. And these are the things that she has to have. And he says that's the reason that I went to work for Procter & Gamble, because he needed to meet me. But he asked me out, and so the rest is history. That was 11, 12 years ago. So at the time, there was a lot of growth in the economy, but at the same time, there was an escalation in crime. It was personal crime, so rape, break-ins, which would always result in death, hijackings, those would be carjackings, I think Canadians would call it. So everybody in South Africa, there's nobody you could talk to who wouldn't tell you that they knew somebody or hadn't been exposed in some way to a crime of some sort, or hadn't lost somebody or somebody been injured. Just horrific stories. A lot of the educated South Africans were leaving, and predominantly the white South Africans. I'd always had Canada in my heart. I always said, one day I'm going to go and live in Canada again. One day I will. Andre had never been to Canada, and so when we got married in 1999, we decided to come to Canada on honeymoon. It was 2 purposes. I wanted to show Andre this country that I absolutely loved, and we wanted to investigate if this was going to be a potential place for us. We realized if we stayed in South Africa, we would still have a very good life. Both of us had great jobs. We both were on the brink of promotion. So, we had a great future ahead of us. It was a growing company. And I think just for the 2 of us, we would have stayed. We wanted to have children, and we really felt like this was the place God was bringing us to. So that cemented the decision process.
Ouch. Is it hot?
So when we left South Africa and had told people that we were thinking of leaving, we had mixed reactions from a variety of people. So family obviously were saddened. My father was disappointed that we were going, but at the same time knew that it was right for us. And then I had some friends who almost called me a traitor, or I felt like a traitor at leaving. I'd spent so much time investing in helping people, and here the country was on the brink of change, or, going through this huge turmoil, and here I was just up and leaving. And there's still times I think if I were there, I could be helping in this way or could be doing that. What am I really doing in Canada? But this is where God wanted us, and it was the right decision. And so then we arrived in Canada, 2001. When we landed, we came with a bank statement customs official said, okay, you need to have proof that you have enough money to come into the country. And we had our South African bank statement, which had 16,000 rand. Now, at the time, the exchange rate was 7-1. And somehow this customs official thought that it was, I don't know why, he thought the bank statement was in Canadian dollars. So he thought we came with 16,000 Canadian dollars. Meanwhile, we had literally about 3,000, if that, 3,000 Canadian dollars. So just a miracle. We came to a townhouse, fully furnished townhouse, which we rented, and we had nothing else, just our 2 suitcases. We didn't even have winter coats, and we arrived in the middle of February. So that was freezing again. Every time I come to Canada, it seemed to have been cold. The first year in Canada was, I would say, the hardest. And I would go as far as to say for most people, the first year of change is really hard because in the beginning, you've got big eyes. I think when I'd come when I was 17 years old, I had a completely different perspective on how I was looking at the world. I was very innocent, very naive, just trying to take things in. Part of growing up happened in Canada. But by the time I got here, I had experienced a lot more in life. And so down the road, I was looking through very different eyes. And, you know, I just noticed things. I just noticed how much of a first world country it was. Wow. I remember applying for our driver's license and there was a little queue that we had to wait in. I remember just going to the post office and they had our details. When our health card expired, things were just sent in the mail. Nothing got lost or stolen in the mail. It wasn't an issue to send money. I guess the efficiency was just amazing. And people would say, yeah, the North Americans are at the cutting edge of everything and, you know, the United States is a world power. But you could see why, is because they focus on how to maximize everything. We were so grateful. And then the second thing that was hugely impressive was the personal safety aspect. How comfortable it was to, you know, just walk down the streets, walk in the dark, have your purse over your back or next to your side without having to hide everything, wearing jewelry openly, being able to wear, you know, designer sunglasses if you wanted to, knowing that they weren't going to be ripped off your face. Cell phones in South Africa were a security feature because everybody needed, you know, you needed to have some way of contacting people if you needed help. Here, so having a cell phone is a luxury. Most people have one, but it's a different context. And those were things that really stood out at us when we first came. There were a few negatives too. We were treated very much as immigrants, but felt also as privileged immigrants because we could see how people who couldn't speak English were treated. And I guess somehow our accent seems to appeal to Canadians, and so it helped us mesmerize our way into a lot of situations. And we also spent a lot of time getting used to things. Grocery shopping would take us 3 to 4 hours because we wouldn't know what we're looking for. We could speak, read, and write English. Like, who knows how other immigrants manage? Even still today, I learn things all the time about how life works in Canada.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
We didn't have a place to worship, so we were looking for a church. We went to many different churches. We found that there were so many politically correct words being used, and there's all this terminology for different styles of Christianity, Pentecostal, evangelical. We didn't know what all that meant. We'd just come from church, so we didn't know what all that stuff was. So we had to learn all about that part of our life.
Let's pray. God in heaven, please.
I think when we first came to Canada, we were really excited that we were coming to a country that we had viewed as a Christian country. So we thought, oh, we'd be very accepted. And it wasn't even something I would say we consciously thought about. And when we got here, we spoke very openly about our faith, very openly. And Andre and I still talk about it today, how we had to actually scale down a lot of what we were speaking about because it alienated people in a way. I'd say in that area we felt a lot more rejection than we did as immigrants. For some reason, Canadians tend to come from some kind of Christian heritage, but the Christian side is not viewed as strongly. The Christian community here seems to have a lot of negative media exposure, I would say. When we would ask people at work about it, it was a topic they would either change the subject or they would vie away from it, or it was very weird. And then suddenly, if we met another Christian, then they would say, "Oh, Catherine, I heard you and Andre are Christians." Yes, it was like this little secret that we, had to keep to ourselves. Even sitting here talking about it, I've got to think, well, I wonder what people are thinking when you talk about being a Christian, speak openly about your faith, which is very unusual because South Africans are very open, wear their heart on their sleeve, talk about everything openly. Canadians tend to be very politically correct, very much walk the fence, don't take a strong viewpoint, don't want to be associated with anything that has, anyone or any other country that has a strong viewpoint. Especially don't mention the United States to a lot of Canadians. They're very, very, I tend to feel they're very anti the United States. And I think the United States is a great place, and I'm so grateful that we live on the border of the United States because there's so many blessings that we get from it, just, being their neighbor. So it was a lot of upheaval, but it was a good time because we got closer to each other and had to rely more on God for his help and his guidance. So now that we've been in Canada for 6 years, 3 children later, we have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a little 6-week-old boy. Canada feels even more like home. I think I would say with my hand on my heart that's when Canada felt like home, is when we had our first daughter, because then we were really part of the community and we could really get involved in all the social programs that the government offers, and really are grateful that we can raise our children in a place like Canada. But it has a few drawbacks that we want to really be conscious of. How do we pass on the blessings that we can appreciate about Canada? How do we pass it on to our children who are very much in the I want, I get generation of Canadians?
And some cookies, Loli. Mind the toes. Mind the toes.
Once a week, we just have soup for dinner or something really small, and we put our money into a jar, and so the girls can actually see we're putting money in so that somebody else can have, and try to expose them to just how privileged they are, especially compared to the rest of the world. Because we have something to compare it to. All they have is this, and it's very hard to teach your children to be grateful or to appreciate and want to give back. Like, why did I want to give back so much? It's because I grew up and saw so many people who didn't have. And you have your cookie with your baby, okay? Okay. Thank you, Jesus, for my snack. And there's a long list of things to be grateful for that I think Canadians would just take for granted because they've got nothing to compare it to, and how to stand up for what you believe in and be able to defend it.
If I had an opinion at a dinner or something, I would be thrown a comment like, well, what do you know? You're a woman. And I found that to be really infuriating.
And if you'd like to stand here, when the players are done with the batting practice, we'll all try to get some autographs. Oh, wow. And in the meantime, would you like to speak with JP, which is my usual, yeah? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, hold on for me, okay?
Our father was very well educated, and he put himself through school. Upon graduating from university, he couldn't really find a job. Korea was in post-war situation. There was a lot of poverty, lack of jobs, so he took on a job as an assistant to an American doctor during the Vietnam War. I was 6 years old at the time. So he went to Vietnam, and 2 of his schoolmates, they applied for various other jobs, and they all got to go together. The assignment, I believe, was for 2 years, and they did a lot of research on how the situation was in Saigon airport, because they were looking to escape. It would have been 1970 or 71, and they found out that there was a huge mix-up or chaos between a flight back to Seoul and to Vancouver. So they had planned for a long time. So 3 of them decided that they were going to escape on the day that they were being sent back to Seoul from their assignment. They got there and they saw that they were armed soldiers. So one of them chickened out and said he couldn't do it, and he went back to Seoul. And the two of them escaped to Vancouver, and that would be one of them is my father. So finally got himself a work permit, got himself legalized here, and was able to sponsor his family to here. And that took 3 years. So there would be our mom, my sister, and myself. It was all about we're going to Canada, you know, and the better place to go. And we thought Canada was what we saw on TV. People wore ball gowns all the time, and they drank and ate, and people are beautiful. And that's how I imagined Canada. In fact, our mother had a couple of long dresses made because, you know, she had to fit into this world. We had no idea what was waiting for us. The day we were leaving, I don't remember anything other than a big scene at the airport. Well, my sister was 8, I was 12. I don't remember how I felt. I think I was just too excited. I thought I was leaving all these little things that I didn't like about Seoul behind, and I was gonna go to somewhere, I guess, equivalent to heaven. My sister, I think, was really nervous because she didn't remember our dad, because she was only 2 when he left. Our mother, however, I remember how our mother was. She totally fell apart because our family members were there. I felt like the entire airport was filled with them. And you know what? I was only 12 years old, so maybe there was a handful, but to me, it was just them. Now I understand, but back then, I didn't. I don't know why, at the age of 12, that learning English was going to be so hard. It's not so much of learning the language, but the culture, too, and just everything was different. School was definitely tough because language barrier is a disability, and I was 12 years old, going on 13. It's not a good age to be having this type of problem. We're the only 2 people in the whole entire school who didn't speak English. I think the whole idea was that our father said, leave the English part until you get to Canada, because he didn't want us to learn it in any other way but the Canadian way. When you leave something behind for something else, you always wonder how it would have turned out the other way. My mom took me to Korea in 1986, and we spent 3 weeks there, and I got rekindled with relatives. They didn't tell me, but they took me there for me to meet some arranged men. And I actually did meet one. He was, and I ended up marrying him in 88, and that's why I went back. And I was married to him for 3 years, and that didn't work out.
What's that? Oh, yeah, okay, Paula, come on in. Let's have a little meeting.
Women are still considered second-class citizen back then in 88. So if I had an opinion at a dinner or something, you know, I would be thrown a comment like, well, what do you know? You're a woman. And I found that to be really infuriating and frustrating. And often I would get up and just leave. And they would say, well, look at her. She drank that water. Look how stubborn she is. Look at the way her mother raised her. How can you be married to such a stubborn, belligerent woman type of deal? So I knew through those 3 years that I didn't really belong there. For the Yankee series, let me think. You mean in terms of promotions and giveaways and stuff like that? I can actually say our mom would be proud. She said she wanted to raise the 2 girls who couldn't survive on top of a mountain with no food. Because coming from where she comes from, a woman's life could be so determined by what a man does to her that she wanted her girls to be independent survivors. Well, they certainly, you know, achieved that just by bringing us to Canada. So what's going on?
We have...
So far, what have I missed?
I realized then that I am no longer Korean, and I think that's when I truly made the commitment. It's funny, when you think that maybe there is something else there for you, you have that one foot out the door, you don't truly make that commitment. But now, knowing that I would only now visit Korea as the land that I was born in, but really this is my home. And now once I have taken that journey and came back in 91, is when I became, I guess, true Canadian. To be Canadian is to have freedom, to do whatever you want, whenever you want.
Okay, this is the Jays dugout.
Freedom for me to speak whenever I want without being shut down to say, what do you know? You're a woman after all. As a visible minority woman, an opportunity within the workforce. Look at me, like I work for a Major League Baseball team.
John Gibbons.
That's when I feel it, is when I'm in a foreign city and a Canadian national anthem, comes up, and it hits more in the heart now than it does with Korean national anthem. It still hits me in the heart, but the Canadian national anthem hits closer now. I remember going to New York with a friend. That the friend just suggests that, if you're going to watch the game, you might want to go on the field. It's the Yankee Stadium. And I recall our father talking about how it was a legendary place. It's one of the places that you must see. And imagine to watch a game there, never mind being on the field wearing a VIP pass. And I remember thinking, wow, only if my father can see me now. And look at me now. That was quite an experience.